All right, I hope everybody is well. Today I want to do a book introduction. This book just came out. It's entitled Hidden Hand, Exposing How the Chinese Communist Party is Reshaping the World. It's by Clive Hamilton and Mareike Ohlberg. It literally just came out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read from the table of contents and show you guys what's in it. And I'm going to read from the preface and the first chapter. They're pretty short. So to kind of give you an idea if this is something that you would like to pick up yourself. So behind the flap of the book, it says, the Chinese Communist Party is determined to reshape the world in its image. The party is not interested in democracy. It sees only a bitter ideological struggle with the West, dividing the world into those who can be won over and enemies. Many political and business elites have already been lured to their corner. Others are weighing up a devil's bargain. Through its enormous economic power and covert influence operations, China is now weakening global institutions, aggressively targeting individual corporations, and threatening freedom of expression from the arts to academia. At the same time, Western security services are increasingly worried about incursions into our communications infrastructure. In a landmark study combining meticulous research with unique insights, Hidden Hand exposes the Chinese Communist Party's global program of subversion and the threat it poses to democracy. We have already missed too many warning signs. Now it is time to wake up. So in the table of contents here, I'll see if I can put them up on the screen, and I'm not going to go through each individual subsection here. So the context. This was published by One World Publications in 2020. And we have the first chapter, which I'm going to read, is entitled An Overview of the CCP's Ambition. The second chapter is A Leninist Party Goes Out into the World. And as you can see here, the different subsections, so feel free to pause if you want to kind of see what those subsections are. Third chapter is Political Elites at the Center, North America. Fourth chapter, Political Elites at the Center, Europe. Political Elites on the Periphery. The Party Corporate Conglomerate. Mobilizing the Chinese Diaspora. The Ecology of Espionage. Media, Our Surname is Party. Culture is as Battleground. Think Tanks and Thought Leaders. Chapter 12, Thought Management, CCP Influence in Western Academia. And 13 is Reshaping Global Governance. All right, before we get started, please... if you like my videos, please like, subscribe, and share them. I always forget to ask that, and I was told that it makes a big difference to remind people to do that. If you do enjoy my content, please share it and like and subscribe to help the algorithm. Right, so quickly, why did I pick up this book, and why do I make these videos? I make videos when I am kind of inspired to and to share information that I find interesting and compelling in these times here. And I think that the situation with China, I don't personally see China as an imperialist force. They are an isolationist culture. They have been for thousands of years. But I feel that they do have kind of intentions to... If there's a power vacuum led by the decline of the West, they will and have been trying essentially to fill that void. So I think they are the CCP at least is a very pernicious and insidious force. And not to say this about the Chinese people at all. I very, very much appreciate ancient Chinese culture, Taoism, Confucianism, and I just wanted to kind of make that point here quickly. So we're going to be starting with the preface. The comforting belief that democratic freedoms have history on their side and will eventually prevail everywhere has always been tinged with wishful thinking. World events of the past 2 or 3 decades have shown that we can no longer take these things for granted. Universal human rights, democratic practice, and the rule of law have powerful enemies, and China under the Chinese Communist Party is arguably the most formidable. The party's program of influence and interference is well planned and bold and backed by enormous economic resources and technological power. The wide-ranging campaign of subverting institutions in Western countries and winning over their elites has advanced much further than party leaders might have hoped. Democratic institutions and the global order built after the Second World War have proven to be more fragile than imagined and are vulnerable to the new weapons of political warfare now deployed against them. The Chinese Communist Party is exploiting the weakness of the democratic systems in order to undermine them, and while many in the West remain reluctant to acknowledge this, democracies urgently need to become more resilient if they are to survive. The threat posed by the CCP affects the right of all to live without fear. Many Chinese people living in the West, along with the Tibetans, Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and Hong Kong democracy activists, are at the forefront of the CCP's repression and live in a constant state of fear. Governments, academic institutions, and business executives are afraid of financial retaliation should they incur Beijing's wrath. This fear is contagious and toxic. It must not be normalized as the price nations have to pay for prosperity. Every Western democracy is affected. As Beijing is emboldened by the feebleness of resistance, its tactics of coercion and intimidation are being used against an increasingly broad spectrum of people. Even for those who do not feel the heavy hand of the CCP directly, the world is changing as Beijing's authoritarian norms are exported around the globe. When publishers, filmmakers, and theater managers decide to censor opinions that might, quote, hurt the feelings of the Chinese people, unquote, free speech is denied. A simple tweet that upsets Beijing can cost someone their job. When university leaders pressure academics to temper their criticism of the CCP or ban the Dalai Lama from their campuses, academic freedom is eroded. When Buddhist organizations pledge their loyalty to Xi Jinping and spies are placed in church congregations, religious freedom is under threat. With Beijing's growing system of surveillance, including cyber intrusions and filming citizens attending lawful protests, personal privacy is violated. Democracy itself is assailed when CCP-linked organizations and party proxies corrupt political representatives and when Beijing co-opts powerful business lobbies to do its work. The what, why, and how of the CCP's influence, interference, and subversion in North America and Western Europe, hereafter the West, is the subject of this book. The CCP's activities in Australia, detailed in Silent Invasion, and New Zealand receive occasional mention, but it's important to keep in mind that the CCP's enterprise is geared towards reordering the entire world, and that while the form varies, the experience of the West is very similar to that of the countries around the globe. It's hard to think of any nation that has not been extensively targeted, from Samoa to Ecuador, from the Maldives to Botswana. CCP influence in the global South is in urgent need of detailed study and exposure, but it is outside the scope of this book. The CCP works hard to convince people in China and abroad that it speaks for all Chinese people. It yearns to be seen as the arbiter of all things Chinese and insists that for Chinese people, wherever they are, to love the country means to love the party, and only those who love the party truly love the country. It claims that the party is the people, and any criticism of the party is therefore an attack on the Chinese people. It is disturbing to find so many people in the West falling for this ruse and labeling critics of CCP policies racist or xenophobic. In so doing, they are not defending Chinese people, but silencing or marginalizing the voices of those Chinese opposed to the CCP and the ethnic minorities who were persecuted by it. At worst, they are agents of influence for the party. In this book, then, we draw a sharp distinction between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people. When we use the word China, we do not do as a shorthand for the political entity ruled by the CCP, in the same way that one might say, for example, that Canada voted in favor of a resolution at the United Nations. Conflating the party and the nation and the people leads to all kinds of misunderstanding, which is just what the CCP wants. One consequence is that overseas Chinese communities have come to be regarded by some as the enemy, when in fact many are the foremost victims of the CCP, as we shall see. They are among the best informed about the party's activities abroad, and some want to be engaged in dealing with the problem. The distinction between the party and the people is also vital to understanding that the contest between China and the West is not a clash of civilizations, as has been claimed. We face not some Confucian other, but an authoritarian regime, a Leninist political party replete with a central committee, a politburo, and a general secretary backed by enormous economic, technological, and military resources. The real clash is between the CCP's repressive values and practices and the freedoms enshrined in the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Freedom of speech, assembly, religion, and belief, freedom from persecution, the right to personal privacy, and equal protection under the law. The CCP rejects each of these in words or in deeds. People who live in close proximity to China understand this much better than do most of the West. It is this understanding that has fueled the recent protests in Hong Kong and led to the re-election in January 2020 of Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen in a landslide vote. The people of Taiwan used the ballot box to say no to the CCP. Some on the left, despite their history of defending the oppressed, find reasons to blind themselves to the nature of China's government under Xi Jinping. They have forgotten how totalitarianism can overpower human rights. Even so, anxiety about the CCP's activities crosses political boundaries, not least within the U.S. Congress, where Democrats and Republicans have formed an alliance to challenge Beijing. The same applies in Europe. Despite their other disagreements, people from the left and the right can agree that China under the CCP is a grave threat, not only to human rights, but to national sovereignty. The reason why so many people in the West downplay or deny the threat posed by the CCP is the theme of this book. One reason is, of course, financial interest. As Upton Sinclair put it, quote, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it," close quote. Another reason, especially in the case of some on the left, is whataboutism. China may be doing some unpleasant things, goes this argument, but what about the United States? The tactic is more effective with Donald Trump in the White House, but whatever criticisms one might have of the U.S. and its foreign policy, both historically and today, and we are strong critics, they do not in any way diminish or excuse the extreme violation of human rights and suppression of liberties by the CCP regime. And for all its faults, the United States, like other democracies around the world, continues to have an effective opposition, elections that change the government, courts that are largely independent of the state, a media that is diverse, unconstrained, and awfully highly critical of the government, and a thriving civil society that can organize against justice or injustice. China under the CCP has none of these. The autocratic tendencies of some politicians in Western democracies are indeed worrying, but they are restrained by the system in which they operate. Very little restrains Xi Jinping's autocratic impulses, even less now that his allies have dismantled the political accord set up by the party to prevent the rise of another supreme leader like Mao Zedong. So while there's much that is wrong in the West and democracies in general, the political model offered by the CCP is not the answer. Ignorance explains some of the difficulty the West is having in coming to grips with the threat of the CCP, as it does the fact that it has not previously had to contend with such an adversary. During the Cold War, no Western country had a deep economic relationship with the Soviet Union. Conscious of the economic and strategic importance of China, many nations are trying to get smarter about the country at the very time Beijing is pouring money into helping us, quote, better understand China, end quote. Receiving information straight from the horse's mouth might seem a sensible route, but as we will show, this is a bad mistake. All right, that is the end of the preface. I think I will leave it here and maybe get that first chapter in next video. Let me know if you guys are interested and would like me to read the next chapter. So thanks for listening.